In this video, I'm testing Vapi and Voiceflow in 7 areas from ease of use and telephony options to latency, pricing, and hidden costs to see which is the better platform for building voice AI agents. I'll also link to a side-by-side comparison below with all the results, and you can plug in your requirements to see which tool's the better fit for you. So let's start with Vapi. So Vapi prides itself on being built for developers, and in practice this means a couple of things. Firstly, the API is very good. It's very well documented. Last week I was doing some stuff hooking this into an NAM workflow, playing around with the API, and it just makes sense. It's clear that they've put a lot of thought into this, which you would kind of hope given that the name is literally an abbreviation of Voice API. The other area where this is really evident is that Vapi is very customizable. You can bring your own API keys for any part of the voice AI stack. You can also bring your own custom LLM model if you want. And so if you're trying to connect this into a third-party web app or build any kind of larger workflow or system where voice agents are a part of that, Vapi make it very easy to do that. In some respects, Vapi is essentially providing voice AI infrastructure. That said, I would argue that Vapi is also one of the easiest platforms to build voice agents on, since they released workflows. So traditionally in Vapi, you would build voice agents or assistants where you drop in a massive prompt here and then you just sit back and hope that your agent does what you want it to do. This has some disadvantages because the more information that you add into the prompt, the more context, and so you get slower latency, but it does give the agent a lot of flexibility. Now, at the end of last year, Vapi released workflows, which allows you to build voice agents in a visual canvas. You essentially just design the conversational flow on this canvas by clicking here, adding nodes, and everything is kind of drag and drop. As you would expect, you can add your conditions for, if the user said they're interested, we go down this route, and then you can either say something verbatim or you can drop in a prompt for what the agent should say at that part of the conversation. Everything is customizable, so you can change the model that is used for this node, you can attach knowledge, you can give it access to tools, which we'll touch on in a moment. And yeah, virtually everything is customizable. You still have a global prompt, so you can pop that in here. But the nice thing is that this doesn't need to be as long if you're building in a workflow because you don't need to enter any of the conversational flow rules here. You can enter those in the individual nodes. So this really just needs to be about things like the role, the persona, and any guardrails for things that you don't want your voice agent to do. So whether you're a developer or not, Vapi is pretty easy to work with. Now let's touch on telephony. So I'm going to go over to phone numbers. Now by default, Vapi give you 10 free phone numbers, which is pretty generous. They are US numbers. There's a couple of restrictions, like you can't do outbound calling via a campaign with them. So the likelihood is if you're actually building a production agent, at some point you would need to import your own phone numbers using something like Twilio or Telnix. But the free numbers are very helpful if you're either doing inbound calling or frankly just for getting up and running and doing some testing quickly without having to faff about with all of this. So let's move on to voice realism. So like most voice agent platforms, Vapi integrates with 11 Labs, but you got a few other options like Cartesia, Element, Rhyme AI, and then Vapi has its own voices, which are pretty decent. So if I just go into one of our agents, I'll show you. So if we just go into one of our agents, I'll show you how this sounds. Now, again, a really nice thing about Vapi is you don't need to have it actually call your phone when you're testing. You can just go up here, click call, which simulates a live call, which doesn't use as much credits and just makes it easy to test.
Good afternoon. Thank you for calling Serenity Spa. How can I help you today?
Hi, I'd like to book an appointment.
Well, what treatment would you like to book today?
I would like to book a haircut.
Great, thank you. Let me check our available slots for haircuts.
Cool. So you get the idea. And that was using the default Vapi voices, but you can obviously change that to any of these options. Now, let's touch on integrations, because if you're using Vapi, chances are you're probably going to need to be connecting it into something else. So we've got a few different node types that we can use to connect this. We can either send an API request or we can connect it into a tool. So you build tools separately and then you connect them to your workflows or your assistants as kind of a separate step. So if I were to just add one here, we can drop down and select tools. These are just some ones that I've built previously. But if we go out of here into tools, we can kind of have a look at how this works. So if you create a tool, you've got a couple of native integrations, including Model Context Protocol. So you could use that to connect into something like make.com, NAN, or anything with an MCP server. But Vapi's also got a few other native integrations. So Slack, Google Sheets, Google Calendar, and Go High Level. And the high level integration is pretty detailed. There's quite a lot of stuff you can do with this. Also, there's a Go High Level MCP server you can use separately as well. So for these ones, all you need to do is enter your API key and you're good. But assuming you don't want to do that, you can also trigger HTTP requests. So again, you could use this if you want to trigger workflows in NAN, make.com, Zapier, that kind of thing, or just have it communicate directly with your app or whatever product you're using. So I'd say Vapi is not bad. There are some other platforms like Simplo, for example, which have a huge range of native integrations. But I think because Vapi is primarily designed for developers, frankly, most people using this are not going to be put out by that. Now let's touch on call concurrency. So by default, I think you need to go into billing now. I think they've recently moved it. If we go into billing, you can set your call concurrency. I think it's down here. Here we go. So by default, Vapi has a call concurrency limit of 10 phone calls. If you need more than that, you need to buy additional phone lines, and they cost $10 a month each. As far as I'm aware, I don't believe there's any upper limit to how many phone lines you can add, other than, of course, your budget. So let's move on to latency. When I ran a standardized latency test with Vapi, the average latency I was getting, this is end-to-end latency, was 536 milliseconds, which is the fastest I've seen of any platform, and frankly, pretty incredible. If you're getting that in a production agent, I would be pretty happy with that. The other nice thing to point out with Vapi is you get a lot of insight into where that latency is falling, and also when you're building your agent, you can see an estimation of what your latency is going to be at different parts of the process. So you can see your transport latency, the LLM stage, the transcription, and then also the voice engine. And equally, when you go into your call logs, you can sort of see this breakdown as well for the actual calls. So if you go in here and we go to the latency summary, we can see what the actual latency was. So this helps when fine-tuning your models and your prompts and your configuration to make sure you're getting the best latency possible. And because Vapi is so customizable, you're not limited by the platform with ways to bring this number down. And then finally, let's touch on cost. So pretty much across the board, Vapi is the most affordable platform for voice AI agents. And the reason for that is, again, Vapi is essentially trying to bring voice AI infrastructure. So you can use it to build your voice agents on and then connect all your own API keys and pay them directly rather than it will go through Vapi. So here, just as an example, we've got 5 kind of leading voice AI platforms. This is based on 3,000 call minutes per month on a typical stack. So GPT 4.1, DeepSeek Nova or DeepSeek Flux, and 11 Labs Turbo V2. Vapi, $270 a month, and then the other platforms are considerably more than that. And you can see the breakdown here. So Vapi charge you basically a 5 cent per minute fee. And then if you use Vapi for things like the voice engine and the LLM and telephony, you're obviously going to pay for each of those. Generally speaking, I find Vapi comes out to around like 9-10 cents per minute, which is quite a bit cheaper than the alternatives. There are a few other things to be aware of. I wouldn't quite go as far as saying these are like hidden costs, but they're things to just be aware of. So if you're in healthcare, for example, this is an additional $1,000 per month if you need HIPAA compliance. Similarly, if you need 60-day call and chat data retention, it's an extra $1,000 a month. So there's certain things like this, and obviously call concurrency, if you need to have 100 phone lines, you're going to rack up costs pretty quickly. But generally speaking, in almost every circumstance, Vapi is going to be the most affordable platform for building voice agents on. So next up, let's have a look at Voiceflow. So Voiceflow is a platform for building customer service AI agents. And there's 2 parts to this. There's the kind of the voice agent part and then also chat agents. And so in Voiceflow, you're building an agent that can be used either as a chatbot embedded on a website, or it can be run as a voice agent. I mention this because when you start building stuff in Voiceflow, it becomes quickly apparent that some features are more designed for the chat agents. So building voice agents is pretty straightforward, and a nice feature is you can just enter in a prompt and it's going to build out an agent workflow around that. So if we go into an agent I've previously built, you can see this nice canvas where you can build out your agents on. And building out these flows is pretty straightforward. You can just drag and drop to add agents. I personally don't love that you have to kind of double click into these to configure your agent. So you have to click on it once, then you have to click that, and then you pop your prompts in here and you can change things like the model. But credit where it's due, Voiceflow's got a decent amount of native integrations. You can see up here, we've got things like Make.com, HubSpot, Airtable, Google Sheets, Gmail, and then we can also connect this into MCP servers, webhooks, etc. In general, it's a pretty powerful platform that's pretty easy to use. In terms of testing your agents, similar to a lot of tools, you can simulate a call in the platform.
Connor, an AI agent that will demonstrate some key concepts in Voiceflow. In this step, I'll demo how you can use exit conditions to navigate the conversation based on the user's intention.
So I personally don't find the voice realism in Voiceflow quite as good as some of the alternatives. It sounds a little bit more robotic. One area where I have been surprisingly impressed by Voiceflow is latency. So when I ran the standardized latency test on Voiceflow, it was only slightly slower than Vapi, which is pretty incredible considering that Vapi is basically just the voice AI infrastructure. So Voiceflow beat both Retail AI and Simflow by quite a decent margin. I would like to see a little bit more in the way of metrics and stats that kind of highlight this. They don't make that quite as visible as some of the other platforms. But if you do run a test, you can see the real-time latency in the logs, as well as your credit usage, which I really like. It's really nice to be able to see this breakdown here while you're testing. Now, telephony options, if we go back into the dashboard, you can go to phone numbers and you can add phone numbers here from the dashboard. Unlike some of the other platforms, you don't get any free numbers with Voiceflow, so you will need to import your phone numbers from another platform. For me, this is not a deal breaker because I kind of have to do this anyway, regardless of what platform I'm using, because I generally need UK numbers. And the platforms that do give you free numbers, generally it's only a US or a Canadian one. Plus, they generally have restrictions on them around things like outbound calling. So not a deal breaker, but it's quite nice to get the free numbers just when you're testing. So it's one less thing that you have to do. So a few other things that are just worth being aware of. When it comes to concurrency, it's going to depend on what plan you're on. So by default on the Pro plan, which is $60 a month, you get 5 concurrent phone lines. Then when you go up to the business plan, you get 15, and then enterprise, presumably it's whatever you negotiate. Now, while we're talking about pricing, Voiceflow is a fairly interesting one because as you can see here, we've got these kind of flat monthly pricing plans. But really what's going on here is you still have an amount of credits. So you can see we've got 10,000 credits, but there's no monthly rollover. The long and short of this is that if you actually use the amount of credits that you buy, then Voiceflow is very affordable. It comes out to around about 8 cents per minute, which is pretty much as low as you can possibly get at the moment for building a voice agent. However, the quirk around the monthly rollover means that, for example, if you only used half your credits one month, you're effectively paying double that amount, which means that's quite a lot more expensive than some of the alternatives. So it all comes down to whether you're actually going to use the amount of credits that you're buying. One little hack you could do is pay for an annual plan, and then you don't have to worry about the monthly rollover. You could also get a lower number of credits in the annual plan, so you kind of definitely use them up. But it's a little bit of a weird way of doing pricing. I wouldn't be surprised if they eventually change it, because most of the other voice agent platforms start with this kind of pricing and then eventually go to pay-as-you-go because of that reason. So both of these are great options for building voice agents on, and given that you can try both of them out for free, I'd recommend doing that to see which one's going to be a better fit for your use case. Now, I'll drop links to both of them below, as well as the side-by-side comparison I put together. And if you'd like to watch me live build the same voice agent on both platforms, as well as 4 other voice AI tools, and then live test them with real phone calls, you can check that video out here.